So yeah, the last few months sure have been something, haven't they? Rather than think about what new nightmares await us in 2020, I instead want to think back to a simpler time. Back to December of 2019, which is my transition into stuff I recorded 6 to 8 months ago. The end of the year is always a time for reflection for most people, to see how far they've come and how things have changed over the past year, but the end of a whole decade is something that feels huge and impactful. In 2010, I was in the middle of 7th grade and thought Get Him to the Greek was the pinnacle of comedy, and 9 years later I think Russell Brand is dead or something. However, I didn't make this video to talk about my above-average life over the course of this decade. I'm here to talk about video games. Yes, the gaming landscape has changed a ton in the last 120 months, and since I'm not seeing anyone else do this, I just want to spend some time and talk about some of the major changes this decade has brought to gaming in general. Let's take a look back at the 2010s in gaming. Entering into 2010, all the major consoles were definitely in the middle of their lifespans. The PlayStation 3 and the Wii had both been out for about 3 years at this point, with the Xbox 360 being slightly older at 4 years. The handhelds of this generation, on the other hand, were definitely in their twilight years, with the Nintendo DS and the PlayStation Portable both having been out for about 5 years at this point. Mobile gaming at the time was getting a huge shot in the arm thanks to the iPhone's relatively new App Store, along with games like Angry Birds and Candy Crush becoming phenomenons big enough to cross over into other mediums like movies. Boy, did that not work out. Motion controls were the hot new thing thanks to the success of the Wii, and Sony and Microsoft were quick-ish to capitalize on its success with the release of Kinect for Xbox 360 and the PlayStation Move for the PlayStation 3. Nobody liked these, and while the Move was quickly forgotten about, the Kinect was forced down people's throats for most of the first half of the 2010s, until well into the lifespan of Microsoft's next console. Speaking of, this decade was crammed full of new hardware that made our eyes gleam and our wallets scream. The DS was allowed to die semi-peacefully with the release of the Nintendo 3DS in 2011, but it didn't actually pick up steam until its $250 selling price was lowered to a much more reasonable $170. 2012 brought us the first contender in the 8th generation of video gaming with the Nintendo Wii U. It was supposed to be Nintendo's big jump into the next generation, but for reasons that have been explained in 1,000 different videos on this platform, it failed spectacularly, and Nintendo started developing its replacement as quickly as 2 years after its launch, but more on that in a minute. The PlayStation Vita also launched in 2012 as the successor to the PSP, and it was a cool little device that definitely had its fans, but it was unfortunately burdened by little to no support from Sony or any major must-have titles. My Vita's analog stick broke off in 2013, and 7 years later, I have yet to get it fixed. If that's not a litmus test for how little most people cared about this thing, I don't know what is. 2013 marked the true start of the next generation with the reveal and release of the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. The PS4 was pushed as the next evolution of the PlayStation brand, while the Xbox One, on the other hand, was marketed more as an all-in-one entertainment package, being able to not just play games, but also stream movies and music and function as a cable box for traditional TV and sports. Its reveal event was a huge mess that didn't even talk about gaming at all until about 30 minutes in, and they wonder why this thing stumbled out of the gate so hard. Eventually, Microsoft did manage to reverse course and start putting an emphasis on mostly games, but by then the damage was already done and the PS4 basically held dominance for the rest of the decade. Or it would have if Nintendo didn't have the comeback of the century. The Nintendo Switch was unveiled in late 2016 and released in early 2017 as the replacement for the failing Wii U. It was super novel for having the ability to be played as both a handheld console as well as on your TV via a dock, and was supported by a killer library of games within its first year, something that the Wii U sorely lacked. It sold more units in 6 months than the Wii U did in 4.5 years, and still managed to be a huge success to this day. The last-gen consoles were eventually phased out by the middle of the decade, but for some reason that hasn't stopped Ubisoft from making more Just Dance games for the f***ing Wii. A lot of new gaming trends and genres became hugely prevalent in the 2010s. MOBAs really started to pick up steam with Dota 2, and especially League of Legends, not just sustaining their popularity throughout the decade, but giving esports a major boost in credibility, and putting them on the same level as more physical sports, with some major tournaments being either streamed or actually televised on sports networks like ESPN, and prize pools being as high as $10 million, sometimes higher. Additionally, Battle Royale games, featuring about 100 players fighting each other until one was left standing, also got massively popular thanks to games like DayZ, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, and Fortnite Battle Royale, the last of which became a phenomenon all of its own around the last few years. It became so popular and addictive that when it was released on mobile phones, teachers had to find ways to stop their kids from playing it in the middle of class, and probably started having sympathy for their own teachers for back when Pokemon was huge. I guess cycles do exist after all. Looter shooters became a minor but still very successful subgenre during this decade, with new entries in the Borderlands series as well as entirely new IPs like Destiny and Tom Clancy's The Division. Collectible card battlers also became hot shit during this time period, with Blizzard's Hearthstone leading the pack and inspiring many imitators like Elder Scrolls Legends or everyone's favorite game, Gwent. While I personally never got into these kind of games, I can't deny the appeal of them. It's like playing Yu-Gi-Oh!, except now you can play with people all over the world and waste your money on loot boxes. Actually, I should probably talk about this too. Especially in the latter half of this decade, debates swelled about whether or not loot boxes, or in-game packs of random cosmetic or usable items that are both generated randomly and can either be earned through playtime or purchased in-game with real money, constituted as gambling. Most of the games that featured them were aimed at children, like Fortnite or FIFA, and with an audience so impressionable, there were legitimate concerns that kids may spend hundreds or even thousands on their parents' credit cards trying to get a skin or move or weapon they want. It eventually got so complicated that even world governments started weighing in, with countries like Australia and the UK launching investigations into whether or not loot boxes should be regulated as gambling, or even banning them outright in the cases of Belgium and China. The debate over loot boxes still continues to this day, and with a bill regarding regulating them slowly making its way through the US Congress, it likely isn't going away anytime soon. One new subgenre that got considerably popular for single-player games were super hard, skill-based RPG adventure games known as Soulslike Games. These are derived from Software's Dark Souls games, but also extend to other titles from the company like Bloodborne and Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, and even homages from other studios like A44's Ashen and Team Ninja's Neo games. Typically, a Souls-like game sets you in a world filled with enemies that are tough to kill, can kill you in 3 hits or less, and requires a good understanding of the game's mechanics and controls in order to progress. I haven't played a Souls-like game, but from what I've heard, they can be super challenging, but also super rewarding as well. This decade also featured the rise of crowdsourcing projects, with Kickstarter becoming the best friend for indie developers trying to make their break in the industry, or veterans trying to fund passion projects that major studios wouldn't. From what I can remember, Shovel Knight became the first major gaming Kickstarter success, and it ended up paving the way for games like Yooka-Laylee, Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, A Waste of Effort, Broken Age, and many more. Even long-awaited sequels like Psychonauts 2 and Shenmue 3 ended up going the crowdsourcing route. Star Citizen is a game that has, as of right now, raised over $250 million, and has added in so much to the developer's initial plan that I don't even know what kind of game it is anymore. This also proved to be a valuable platform not just for games, but gaming hardware too. The Oculus Rift was announced in 2012 as a Kickstarter campaign for the first consumer gaming VR headset, and it completely shattered its goal within weeks. And when it finally came out in 2016, it led to a huge prominence in VR hardware, along with the rise of its major competitors, the HTC Vive and the PlayStation VR. Also, the Ouya happened here. I guess that was a thing to spend money on. Outside of just Kickstarter, indie game development got massive during this decade, and there are so many quality titles that had such major impacts that it's hard to just pick a few to talk about here. Cave Story was a massive Metroidvania hit. Shovel Knight is pure platforming ecstasy that just gets better and better with each new expansion. Playdead's Limbo and Inside are artistic marvels. Fez was a massive undertaking that turned into one of the biggest indie titles of the early 2010s. Hotline Miami and Retro City Rampage provide some retro-inspired addictive fun. The Stanley Parable and Bastion made you second-guess how much choice you actually have with games. Stardew Valley is one of the most enjoyably laid-back titles of the decade. Celeste and Hellblade managed to tell touching or gut-wrenching stories about struggling with mental health. Undertale became a huge, quirky hit that took Toby Fox from ROM hacker to one of the most respected developers in the industry. Cuphead is one of the most gorgeous and passion-filled games I've ever seen. Overcooked is pure, chaotic multiplayer madness. Enter the Gungeon is a tough-as-nails bullet hell brimming with creativity. And the list just goes on with titles like Journey, Papers, Please, Don't Starve, Hollow Knight, Return of the Obra Dinn, FTL, Hyperlight Drifter, Thomas Was Alone, Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, Outlast, Firewatch, Dead Cells, Untitled Goose, Night in the Woods, Axiom Verge, Nidhogg, Octodad. This list is so massive and never-ending that it's a video all on its own. What I can say for sure, though, is that this decade proved that indie development is not only viable, but can produce some of the most artistically rich, profound, and just straight up fun gaming experiences imaginable. Something that got really prevalent during the latter half of the decade was a major resurgence of remasters, re-releases, or just straight up remakes of titles from generations past. Likely due to the fact that the PS4 and initially the Xbox One weren't backwards compatible with previous systems, developers suddenly had a massive interest in porting or just straight up recreating their biggest titles for these new consoles. I also feel like this mostly had to do with companies trying to capitalize on the big craze of nostalgia for the 90s and 2000s. With a lot of people in their 20s and 30s wanting to re-experience the games of their childhood and having the disposable income to try and do so now, it's a no-brainer for companies to try and pump out new versions of their older titles because fond memories equal big bucks, just look at Hollywood. On one end were remastered collections that brought several games in a series to new consoles with some added tweaks, like the Uncharted collection, the BioShock collection, Assassin's Creed's Ezio trilogy, Halo's Master Chief collection, and the Kingdom Hearts 1.86755309 collections, among some other ones. On top of that, there are also full-blown remakes of acclaimed titles for a new generation, like the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy, the remake of Resident Evil 2, Ratchet & Clank, the Spyro Reignited trilogy, Shadow of the Colossus, the Mario & Luigi remakes for the 3DS, and more recently the Pokemon Let's Go games for Switch. This decade was so remake and remaster heavy that we even got remasters of games released not too long after the original game, like The Last of Us, Tomb Raider, God of War 3, Dishonored, Gravity Rush, Skyrim. Oh, hang on, that doesn't count, that's on everything. This trend didn't just stop at software either. In 2016, Nintendo unveiled the NES Classic, a microconsole with 30 built-in NES games that can be played on your big screen in beautiful high definition. I never got a hold of one, but this was such a cool little product, giving people without access to emulation or an actual 30-year-old NES the opportunity to experience these games in a super authentic way. The NES Classic was a monster success, and it was soon followed up by the SNES Classic in 2017. Additionally, other companies tried to capitalize on the retro microconsole hype train, with Sony releasing the PlayStation Classic in 2018, and Sega releasing the Genesis Mini in 2019, with a Konami-backed TurboGrafx-16 Mini due out in March of this year. In terms of studios, the big three stayed largely consistent throughout the decade, although Microsoft made a huge push for acquiring smaller studios to feed their ever-growing tech empire. Literally, within the last 2 years, Microsoft has bought out Obsidian, Playground Games, Undead Labs, Ninja Theory, Compulsion Games, NXile Entertainment, and goddamn Double Fine. That's 7 studios in 2 years. Unfortunately, while some studios flourished during this decade, there were others that didn't do so well, and ultimately got shuttered before this decade closed out. Among them were Peter Molyneux's Lionhead Studios, mostly known for the Fable games, or as I always called them. Lionhead faced some difficult times following the resignation of Molyneux in 2012, but the remainder of the staff used this opportunity as a chance to redefine themselves in the studio, and boy, they sure did. Well-known publisher THQ, best remembered for all those SpongeBob games you played as a kid, was also forced to shut down this decade following lingering financial issues, until their assets were eventually bought up by Nordic Games, who eventually renamed themselves THQ Nordic for better brand recognition. But by far, the biggest studio implosion of the last decade had to be that of Telltale Games. In their heyday in the early to mid-2010s, they were absolutely massive, developing adventure games with the licenses to properties like The Walking Dead, Borderlands, Marvel, Batman, Jurassic Park, The Wolf Among Us, and Game of Thrones, and that's just scratching the surface. They were developing a ton of games released episodically all at the same time, and that kind of led to their downfall. They just took on way too many projects with not enough money or resources to support them all. And everything came crashing down in 2018, when the studio suffered a sudden majority studio closure, which laid off almost all of their employees, and essentially led to an abrupt end for the monumental studio. To add even more salt in the wound, a majority of their digital titles were also delisted in 2019, leaving most people with no way to play them except for buying physical copies. The story doesn't end there though. Towards the end of 2019, Telltale's assets were purchased by LCG Entertainment, a holding company now doing business under the Telltale name and reviving some of its dormant franchises, starting with The Wolf Among Us. So hey, maybe we'll see a return to form for Telltale at some point. Only time will tell. Finally, I want to end this video off by mentioning some of the biggest studio titles from the last decade, of which there were just a ton. There were so many phenomenal franchise titles and AAA games that came out over the last decade that I have no idea where to start. Red Dead Redemption, BioShock Infinite, StarCraft 2, The Return of Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Country Returns, the Fire Emblem series saving itself from near extinction with 2 quality titles, and 3 other ones, 4 new generations of Pokemon, 2 wildly varying degrees of quality. Mass Effect concluded its epic story, before concluding the entire series probably. Kingdom Hearts 3 finally got released after years of waiting. Portal 2, Resident Evil 7, Super Mario Maker, Super Mario Odyssey, Doom 2016, Mario Kart 8, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Metal Gear Solid 5, Grand Theft Auto 5, Elder Scrolls 5, Persona 5, Zelda Breath of the Wild. This list is practically infinite. And that's not even counting any of the new franchises and IPs established this decade, like Bayonetta, Dark Souls, The Last of Us, Titanfall, Overwatch, Danganronpa, Rocket League, and new Nintendo mainstays like Splatoon and Xenoblade Chronicles. The 2010s were a monumental decade for gaming, with hundreds of quality titles that got released over the past 10 years. Honestly, I want to end this video attempting to talk about how games have evolved as a connective experience over the past 10 years. But I don't think I'm smart enough to make an analysis that deep. So instead, let's look forward to the immediate future of gaming. With new consoles from Sony and Microsoft coming this holiday season, to VR and game streaming services becoming the next big thing, it looks like the next decade will push gaming to new creative and technological heights, the likes of which we have never seen before. And I think that alone is worth getting excited for. Here's to 2020, and all the great gaming memories to come in this year and beyond. Hi, and welcome to the end of the video, where I am talking without a script and going completely off the cuff. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you making it this far. If you like the video, make sure to hit subscribe so you'll know when my new videos go up. Hit the like button, comment with anything else that happened in the past decade that I didn't even talk about or glossed over, because there's only so much I can fit in a 17-minute video. I understand the dramatic irony of saying here's to 2020 at the end of this video, but I recorded most of this back in December, and I didn't feel like making a new outro. So anyway, new videos are coming soon, some on movies, some on TV, some on video games, but I'm so happy that this first video is out, and here's to making all the videos I've always wanted to see on YouTube. Alright? Take care, everyone.